I watched every single episode of Drive to Survive, and we watched them back to back to back together, actually, live on the channel last night. And as we went along, we sort of had questions and queries about the different episodes and whether or not they were worth watching. So I thought I'd give you a quick rundown of every single episode, what kind of happens in that episode, do you need to watch it, is it worthwhile, and then also come up with some of the bad things that they missed out in this series and I think would have really added to the overall series if they would have been able to get in. Like, episode 1 starts off fairly nicely. It's a good build-up. You generally get to know the characters that you're going to have over the course of the season, which drivers are going to be in different episodes and aren't. And I think, actually reflecting on it, episode 1 was really important because it does point out the drivers that really aren't going to be in it for the rest of the season, because you meet quite a few of the drivers, and then some of the drivers I thought, oh, that maybe they'll be in later episodes, and they just weren't. So if you watch episode 1 and your favorite driver isn't in episode 1, they're probably not going to be in the rest of the series, because episode 2 delves straight into McLaren, goes straight into Daniel Ricciardo, his first sort of few races at McLaren, and the ups and downs that he had. And I think actually I'd forgotten that Daniel Ricciardo started the season with a 6th place and a 7th place finish, and it wasn't too bad, although he was pretty disappointed with that, and it kind of spiraled from there. And it basically was a nice insight into the behind the scenes with Daniel Ricciardo. Obviously, Daniel Ricciardo is a great character and a great person to have in this kind of series, but it wasn't an amazing episode either. It was only the first sort of 5 races that it covers, up to about Monaco, and you see Daniel Ricciardo sort of fluctuating and not getting on with the car, and there's a little bit of a rivalry between him and Lando Norris, but they kind of leave it on a bit of a knife edge, and they come back to McLaren later on in the season, because episode 3, they then cut to the Silverstone incident. They start to build up the Hamilton versus Verstappen battle. They talk a little bit about Bahrain, and obviously they're almost coming together then. The fact that Hamilton ends up getting the win even though Verstappen got the overtake off the track, and they build up towards Silverstone, and the fact that the two were sort of trading wins here and there. And as we got towards Silverstone, and it was looking like Max Verstappen was going to win the title, basically, it was down to Silverstone and Hungary for Hamilton to really grab some points back. And that's what episode 3 goes into, that championship battle. And also there's a 1 minute 10-second penalty. Like, Hamilton obviously gets the 10-second penalty in Silverstone, and that 10-second penalty lasts a whole minute in the Netflix series, which I thought was very, very funny. Episode 4 is the best episode by far, and it's going to make me sound a little bit obvious because I was hyping it up all season, but the Haas episode is the best episode, and it's the best episode again. It was the best episode in season 3. It's the best episode in season 4. It is phenomenal. It's by far and away the best episode because you get to see the behind the scenes. You get Gunther Steiner and his character, and he just works for Netflix. Like, I'm so glad that they get him involved so much, and actually you see little clips of him throughout the entire season because he just has that personality that you want to see on camera, and it works. It's so, so funny. But also, you get to see a lot of Nikita Mazepin, and you get to see a lot of behind the scenes of how he came into Formula 1, the money that Alcala were bringing to Haas, and the pressure, actually, that the Mazepins were putting on the team. And it's a really weird sort of 15-20 minutes part of that episode where Nikita Mazepin genuinely thinks that Mick Schumacher is in a completely different car. And there's people around Nikita Mazepin that are telling him he's in a completely different car, and that Alcala and the Mazepins start to threaten Haas effectively that they're just not going to pay if there aren't massive changes made to the Haas car. And then it culminates at the end of the episode with the Sochi race, and Mazepin goes on to intermediate tyres before anybody else, obviously, because he's in a Haas and he's at the back of the grid. They've got nothing left to lose. But they play that off as Nikita Mazepin being like the most intelligent driver on the day. And he comes in 18th place. And then they play a radio message where he beats Mick Schumacher and Nicholas Latifi, but both of those drivers didn't finish the race. So it's like a really weird ending to episode 4, but by far and away the best episode, and just offers so much insight into behind the scenes at Haas, which was just excellent to watch. Episode 5 jumps back to McLaren. A little bit of Ferrari sprinkled into the McLaren episodes I should have mentioned as well, but they are mainly McLaren heavy, and again jumps back to Daniel Ricciardo. So this is kind of Daniel Ricciardo episode 2, where Again, we see Daniel Ricciardo, the struggles that are going on there, but we also see a little bit more of Zach Brown and the fact that McLaren are trying to build up and they see this season as a real turning point. They were really expecting quite a lot from Daniel Ricciardo and he hasn't quite hit their expectations yet. And obviously that culminates with the win in Monza. We don't see too much after the win in Monza from McLaren. They kind of just go from sort of the mid-season break to Monza, and that kind of juxtaposition between Lando Norris doing incredibly well, picking up so many consistent podiums, and Daniel Ricciardo really struggling. And they play off this kind of rivalry between Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo. And I don't know how much of that was true. They picked very particular clips, and obviously you've got 9 months worth of footage. They can pick very specific things to go in. But it seems like they were trying to build up maybe a Lando versus Daniel battle. And then obviously when Lando is told to stay behind Daniel in Monza, maybe that was a little bit more dramatic than it was in real life. Episode 6 was also exceptional. One of the best episodes in my opinion. It jumps to Williams and their battle from the back. And the fact that, you know, they came 10th last year and they are trying to rebuild. Obviously the change, Claire Williams is in it for a little while and talks about the transition of her obviously leaving the team. But a really nice insight into the behind the scenes of Williams and what they're doing and how they're moving forward. And I think they really just wanted to keep hold of George Russell, basically, was the come away from a lot of it. Like, George Russell really did help the team. And George Russell's mentality is talked about quite a lot in this episode. And the fact that he was always trying to get the most out of that Williams. He was there every single time, and even when he gets that podium in Spa, this is actually in a later episode you see, even when he gets the podium in Spa, he grabs the team management, he grabs the engineers straight afterwards and is like, right, how can we build on this? How can we do something better? And of course, there's the moment where he offers to basically stay behind Latifi in Hungary and do everything that he possibly can to prioritise Nicholas Latifi's race in Hungary as well. But the Williams behind the scenes was very, very good. Episode 7 is the most confusing episode out there. Episode 7 is so incredibly weird. It starts with Yuki Tsunoda, and then the battle between Yuki Tsunoda and Esteban Ocon, which I didn't know was a battle. I didn't know that those two were, you know, on the same kind of wavelength over the course of the season. But it kind of goes with the Yuki Tsunoda train. So we've got Yuki Tsunoda moving to Milton Keynes and Will Buxton absolutely slating Milton Keynes and the fact that Yuki Tsunoda definitely doesn't settle in there very well. And then we obviously see his transition moving to Italy, his new training regime, and how Red Bull kind of had a little bit of an influence on Yuki Tsunoda coming into the sport, but also the changes that happened to Yuki Tsunoda's regime over the course of the season. And then they kind of shoehorn in Alpine and especially Esteban Ocon and Ocon's win in Hungary. And it felt a little bit weird that they were trying to find a slot, obviously, for this Esteban Ocon win. They definitely wanted to talk about the Ocon win maybe in a little bit more detail, but they'd already filmed so much of Yuki Tsunoda, so it kind of feels like they just squished these two things together into one episode. It does work. I didn't dislike the episode. It was nice to meet Yuki a little bit more and get to know Yuki behind the scenes, and he is a very, very like relatable guy, and the fact that he absolutely hates training is just hilarious. But they kind of play it off as Yuki being a little bit lazy, and then they try and fit in this Ocon episode, and it's a bit weird. But then we move on, and episode 8 is Bottas versus Russell. And this was quite interesting, but didn't offer any real insight, and actually jumps back to Imola. So we're 8 episodes in, and we're still back at Imola, and we're talking about Imola quite a lot, which is obviously the second race of the season. And then jumps ahead to Spa, obviously, with George Russell getting that podium, and then being announced at Mercedes. And we do see a little bit of Toto Wolff, George Russell, their interaction. We see a little bit of Toto Wolff and Valtteri Bottas, but again, it didn't add anything new. It didn't add any like crazy insight into the behind the scenes of Mercedes. It was basically just Toto Wolff debating whether or not to keep Bottas or to get George Russell in the car. And obviously we know now that George Russell was the pick for that. Episode 9, and now this is one of my main gripes with the whole series. Like, episode 9 jumps straight to Qatar. like we saw over the course of the first 8 episodes, we've seen Spa, we've seen Sochi, and we've seen Monza. In terms of the second half of the season, we've seen 3 races after the summer break. We've seen lots and lots of before. Like, there was a lot of Bahrain, obviously the testing before the series. There was a lot of Spain actually as well, a little bit of Portugal in there. A lot of Monaco too, lots and lots of Monaco footage. And then it kind of sprinkled in like Silverstone and Hungary. And then it just jumps to Qatar and Jeddah. And it was a good episode, and it was really interesting. And obviously, Qatar and Jeddah was the part of the season where it was building up again, that Max Verstappen versus Lewis Hamilton, and they were building up to like this 2-episode finish where episode 9 is Qatar and Jeddah, and then episode 10 is Abu Dhabi and the final race of the season. But it just seemed weird. It felt like they missed out a lot of the storylines in the second half of the season. Like, they don't mention Brazil at all. And, like, Brazil was one of the big moments. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton coming from the back of the grid to win the race. The wing incident, were Mercedes cheating? All of that happened over the course of the Brazilian weekend. And they just didn't mention it whatsoever. It was a bit weird. Episode 9 was very good, though. It was nice to relive those two races because Qatar and Jeddah were probably up there as some of the best races of the season, and the insight and the fact that we got to relive those I did really like. Episode 10 is slow, like super, super slow. Obviously, it focuses just on the final race of the season and actually doesn't go any further than that. It finishes with Max Verstappen becoming the world champion, but there's 25 minutes of this episode where there's no racing whatsoever. It's just Toto Wolff, it's Christian Horner, back and forth, and talking about Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. They obviously show a little bit of the qualifying. I think the fact that Max Verstappen doesn't like Drive to Survive and doesn't want to be involved really killed this episode. Like, they basically just had to use footage that we'd already seen from the Sky Sports live streams, and that was about it in terms of what we saw. And then obviously we just saw the Perez driving. They actually focused on Lando Norris versus Carlos Sainz for the first lap, which was a bit weird, rather than the Hamilton-Verstappen battle that was going on up top. And then, of course, Latifi, the safety car, the Massey, and so on and so forth. They were always going to end the series with that, but it didn't offer anything new. It didn't offer any insight that we didn't already know. That's like a quick rundown of the series, and it was overall pretty good. As I said, if I had to pick 2 episodes for you to watch, I'd say episode 4 and episode 6, and the rest you can kind of watch if you're fans of those drivers. Like, I definitely recommend episode 2 and episode 5 if you're a McLaren fan. I'd recommend episode 1 if you hadn't watched the series, if you hadn't watched the season, sorry. Like, if you're coming into Formula 1 for the first time, you definitely need to watch episode 1, but if not, then you don't really need to. Episode 3 was a bit 50-50, a bit wishy-washy. You don't really need to watch it. It just builds up to the Hamilton versus Verstappen fight that they cover in 9 and 10 anyway. Yuki Tsunoda's episode's interesting just to know Yuki a little bit more. And then 9 and 10, if you watch the final 3 races of the season, you kind of don't need to watch these again. But again, like, knowing a little bit behind the scenes, seeing Toto Wolff and Christian Horner go at it is, again, just entertaining if you are a Formula 1 fan. Things that they really missed. And now, like, if you were hoping to watch Perez's win in Baku, or Baku in any way whatsoever, it's not mentioned. Like, it's considering it was probably one of the best races of the season. Obviously, Sergio Perez's first win for Red Bull. The fact that that was really influential on the Constructors' Championship at the time, not mentioned whatsoever. Neither is Gasly's podium there, or the fact that Vettel gets a podium in Baku either. There's not much Ferrari, and this was a real disappointment for me because I wanted to see Carlos Sainz at Ferrari, to be honest with you. I was really looking forward to see how he transitioned between McLaren and Ferrari. There's a tiny little bit, they kind of talk about Leclerc and Sainz and the fact that they're friends and the fact that they started to get on with each other and they started to do things outside of just being on the track with one another to kind of get used to being in a team together. But apart from that, you don't really see much of Ferrari and there's not too much insight into Sainz's transition over. Alpine, apart from the Ocon sort of sprinkling in the Yuki Tsunoda episode, you don't really see Alpine at all. There's no insight into Alonso's podium. There's no insight into Ocon's almost podium in the final couple of races. What was it, Jeddah, where Bottas just pipped into the line. There's no Alpine at all, really. Like, you don't get to know Alpine whatsoever, apart from that little sprinkling in the Yuki Tsunoda episode. Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo do not exist in this documentary. I did not see Giovinazzi, Kimi Räikkönen once. Lance Stroll, you don't see at all. You see the occasional message from Sebastian Vettel, but yeah, those two teams, if you're a fan of Aston Martin, a fan of Alfa Romeo, and you're looking for insight into those two teams, this is not the series for you. They are not even slightly covered in this series. And then, yeah, as I said, the first 8 episodes only really cover the first half of the season. Like Spa, Monza, and Russia are mentioned, but the entirety of the second half of the season, it almost feels like Netflix did a lot of filming in the first half of the season. Like they were there for Bahrain and Imola and Portugal. They were there for France. They were there for Monaco. They were there for Silverstone. And then in the second half of the season, they were like, oh, we'll just turn up to the occasional race. Like we really don't see much insight into a lot of the races that went on this season, and a lot of the really key moments between Hamilton and Verstappen. We don't see Perez in Mexico, which I think would be really fun to see, and how, you know, obviously his podium in Mexico was a massive thing for his entire career. We don't see that at all whatsoever. And the final 2 episodes, the fact that they're just based on Hamilton versus Verstappen, like I kind of get it. Obviously, it was the big talking point. Obviously, they haven't had a series yet where they've had a real title fight go all the way to the end like this. But the fact that episode 3, episode 9, and episode 10 are all just Hamilton versus Verstappen, they're all just showing the collisions between the two of them, the fact that they came together in Silverstone, the fact they came together in Monza, it was lacking a little bit for me. And I feel like if you're a Formula One fan, you kind of don't need to watch most of the Drive to Survive season. If you are not a Formula One fan and you're thinking of getting into Formula One, it's a great avenue to get to know some of those key drivers that I think will be around for the foreseeable future. Your George Russells, your Lando Norrises, your Yuki Tsunodas. Like, you do get to know them quite well. But overall, they were my thoughts. I'd say definitely watch episode 4. If you're going to watch one episode, just watch the Haas one. But like, that was fairly obvious. I think everyone knew that from the start. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like if you are new. Comment down below, what is your favourite episode of Drive to Survive from this season? What was your favourite moment from this season of Drive to Survive as well? I'd love to know, because I think me and Gunther Steiner are just best friends. I just absolutely love him. Thanks so much again. I'll see you next time.